Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Stern, Senior Manager for Local Arts and Business Partnerships here at Americans for the Arts, and welcome to the third and final session of Part 3 of the How to Partner with Your Chamber of Commerce series. This session is entitled Moving as Equals, Accomplishing Long-Term Development Goals. We have multiple resources available for you on this activity page to view in tandem with this recording. Access the toolkit under the Toolkit tab, the transcript for this video under the Transcript tab, and additional resources are under the Resources tab. Email us at artsu@artsusa.org should you need any assistance. I'm pleased to welcome our two presenters from York, Pennsylvania. Kelly Gibson is the President and CEO of the Cultural Alliance of York County, and Silas Chamberlain is Vice President of Economic and Community Development at the York County Economic Alliance. Thank you all so much for being here. We're going to have a short presentation from Kelly and Silas, followed by a moderated conversation. And so I will pass it over to both of you to get us started.
Thank you so much, Jessica. It's great to be here with my American for the Arts family. I am Kelly Gibson. As Jessica mentioned, I am the president of the Cultural Alliance of York County. We are the only United Arts Fund in all of South Central Pennsylvania. And over our 22 years, we are proud to have supported our cultural community with over $12.2 million in dollars granted out. And our main advocacy role is advocate, connect, and steward those dollars. I'll hand it over to you, Silas.
Great, thanks, Kelly. We are the York County Economic Alliance, and in York County, we function as our county's Chamber of Commerce and our Certified Economic Development Corporation. We are a very long-standing organization. Our entities have been around for over a century, and we are very much a traditional economic development organization in that we do financing, business attraction, workforce development, capital projects, talent attraction, pretty much the full gambit of economic development activities under one roof. And we also administer on behalf of our county, our Industrial Development Authority, Redevelopment Authority, Land Bank Authority. So really have our tentacles in a lot of work across the county. And I share with you on the right some of the impacts that we have, just to show you that we are very much a bricks and mortar financing type of economic development organization that can do $500 million financing projects or grants to, a couple thousand organizations. And I say that because you probably have chambers and certified economic development organizations in your community that may also seem like traditional organizations. But just because they're doing brick and mortar projects and these big financing projects doesn't mean they can't be a significant partner in your work around arts and culture and quality of life programs. So just to frame the presentation that Kelly's going to give on some of our work together, I wanted to explain how we came to really focus on some of these shared goals. And this really happened through the York County Economic Action Plan. This is our 10-year economic development strategy for York County. Back in 2019, we came together and said we wanted to do this plan and really cast an ambitious vision for the future of economic development in York County. We spent all of 2020 working together to bring together, folks from traditional business, from nonprofits, from education, across all of our different sectors. And we were very open to saying that we could do a better job at economic development in York County by focusing on a people-focused and place-based approach to economic development that included promoting investment in arts and culture and outdoor amenities and the infrastructure that support them, building capacity for placemaking and quality of place throughout our county, really refocusing on our historic boroughs, which are one of our great assets in York County, and continuing to be very transparent around the economic impact data related to the creative economy and the outdoor economy in York County. We took all of those different goals and all the input from 1,000+ stakeholders and created an economic action plan that received unanimous consent from our county commissioners back at the end of 2020. And we've spent the last 2 years implementing that plan. Kelly was one of the co-chairs of our Sense of Place and Quality of Place working groups. And there's a lot of great focus on sense of place and quality of life built into the plan as a result. And Kelly is going to talk about just one of those key goals coming out of the EAP that we've been able to work on together.
Great, thank you, Silas. So, really, it ties directly back to this long-term economic impact plan for our county that we need to take a good look at. What are the assets that we have for cultural amenities in all of York County, and what those outdoor assets are, even though it may not seem like these two groups, these sectors overlap, they really do. And on that quality of place committee, we had both represented and really realized we didn't have a really great census of how many of these assets we had. So how do we map and capture those, and how do they relate to one another? And also, how do other communities support these assets? We know that infrastructure wise, and even through pandemic, as we during COVID-19 shut down in 2020, worked through that plan, we had very different reactions to COVID by both sectors. The cultural sector completely shut down before many other sectors even had to, but yet the outdoor sector ramped up and got overrun. So how did those two infrastructures deal with that? And also, how can we better prepare and support those different outdoor and cultural sectors with a mix of support? So that order, marching order from that economic impact plan was find out how other places do it, and how can we bring a mix of support to both of these sectors in the future? And so it was really interesting to study both the cultural sector and the outdoor sector, even though they had kind of opposite reactions to COVID, with the outdoor sector really kind of being overrun and really having a lot of different people using them that hadn't used those different outdoor amenities before. So you saw them really leaning on part-time employment. That really came out of these results from our survey, as well as what was really interesting was, even though we had a shutdown of our cultural community, both our public and our different ARPA CARES dollars came in to help them weather that storm. And many of them came out of that time period being able to add full-time employees. So they added full-time staff that they had not been able to add before. So we really saw that mix. We were also really happy to see when we did that survey, there's over 270 groups mapped on our ecosystem map. So we really had captured a great amount of cultural and outdoor assets we didn't know were in our community before. One other really important thing on this slide is if you take a look at the mix of their income for these organizations, it's really important to show that it's really revenue, right? Earned revenue is a big piece of the dollar mix that we get. Contributed income is also a big piece. We rely heavily on both earned revenue in both cultural and outdoor sectors, and we rely on contributed revenue. But it's a good mix in that our groups are really not seeing a lot of public support, and they're not reliant upon it. They've done a good job of really maximizing earned revenue to make most of their dollars go. And here, this is also really important, something I think we probably anecdotally knew, but is really important for us to know, is the amount of operating budgets. 57% of our groups are $100,000 budgets or less. So we really have a lot of small to mid-sized groups. And I don't think that would be surprising to many folks, but it just shows that these are organizations who do a lot for a little. And I think that part of that too is that because there's not a strong mix of different types of support, they kind of stay at a certain size. So I think you might see that that is why you also have that correlation of relying on part-time and seasonal employees. That's what they can afford. I think if we had a different mix of public support in there, you'd see that they could turn into full-time living wage positions, especially in our outdoor sector. And again, I mentioned this earlier, but this really illustrates that operational support that was provided through both CARES and ARPA funding for our cultural and outdoor assets was really what kept them from closing. And many of them actually got stronger. They actually had some dollars coming in from that public dollar for operating support that allowed them to add to staff, that allowed them to actually pivot. Many of them added different pieces to their facilities to allow them to do, virtual or outdoor performance. Again, infrastructure pieces for our outdoor spaces so they could be used. This is what those dollars, that investment really does for the mix. And it's really important. And as a United Arts Fund, this always is something I like to show. You really need to have a mix of public local funding. So this map shows the Pennsylvania Cultural and Museum Preservation grant came out in 2020, and that was a state level grant done by our Department of Community and Economic Development for preservation of our museums and cultural institutions. But you can see from this graph how little, almost none of the organizations that receive those dollars are small to mid-sized. Again, remember, we are made up of mostly small to mid-sized groups, so hardly any of those dollars really impacted and helped York County organizations. And so when you have those decision-making happening at the state and federal level, you're really not seeing the trickle down and dollars getting into the hands of small and mid-sized groups because they just don't have that access. Now, here's dollars that were allocated locally, and you can see quite the difference here of the support, where really most of that support was driven towards the small and mid-sized groups because that's what we have. And we were able to really have that advocacy, and it does really trace back, again, when you make your decisions based on your county's economic action plan, you can make a case really easily why these economic generators needed that operational support at a critical time, even if they weren't able to be fully open or open at all. And, you know, really our county commissioner and government really understood that because they've been part of this planning process for the entire time. So this is our ecosystem map. It's amazing. We love seeing it because it's a map that's not geographical. It's based on relationships. So what you're seeing is how different outdoor and cultural groups connect together. And what this is valuable for is to really show where you have drops in connection, where you would want to have more organizations more in touch with each other. It really is important for your, really quality of place assets to be working together, to have synergies and to really kind of communicate. Most of the connection drops really are due to a few things. One is not having shared resource revenue for public support. When you see dollars flowing, you'll see that they get more connected because there is some way of them to communicate and a way for them to work together. So this was really valuable for us to show where we could build those connections. And also it continues to grow. It's a live map. So we're really thrilled to see not only can you pull up some demographic and employment data from all of these organizations, but we can continue to add to it as we discover new outdoor and cultural groups or as they come online. So it's something that we can continue to monitor. So it was very valuable, one, to capture what we have, but really to continue to let it live and grow. So I think this slide really for me shows that there isn't some magic thing that other communities have that York doesn't have. Sometimes when you talk about public mixes of support, we really wanted to know, well, how do other places do it? Well, let's look at places across the country that have similarities to us geographically, demographically, because what we wanted to illustrate to folks reading our report and understanding it is there's no special sauce these other places have that make their public support possible and ours impossible. It's really just the willingness to do it. They have the same political climates we have. They have the same struggles that our governments have here. So it's really just to illustrate that we really could do this and other places have done it successfully. And it's just the willingness to do it that we need. So I think this gives a lot of talking points and comfort around there's no magic thing one community has, our community lacks. And this here talks about the different types when we say public funding mechanism and public support, that all different places do it differently. It really can be something that you build to fit the needs of your own community. A percent for art is very different from, utilizing sales tax or having, property tax abatement. There's all different ways of doing it. So we wanted to take a look at different models to see if any of those were a direct fit, but also to show that you can really build it to scope. How does your community want to use those funds and support both cultural and outdoor and maybe other needs in the community, and then build it specific to your own community? That's really the messaging we heard loud and clear when we talked to these other communities about what worked well and what didn't, is having a strong group of folks who are working on how those dollars get allocated and a really strong messaging to the public of why it's important to support and that their dollars will be used to really make their quality of place in life better.
And so where we're leaving off with our report is really menu of options that we now have. We have the data to tell us about both the sectors We have the best practices from other communities, and we have a set of criteria that's going to help us determine which one's the best fit for York County. And what jointly the Cultural Alliance and the Economic Alliance will do is launch a steering committee of civic leaders, business leaders, creatives, philanthropic supporters, and work through those options that are in the plan to say, what is that best fit for York County? And when we arrive at that together, then to develop an advocacy campaign and really our best case for how we can convince those to write policy and help enact legislation to help put it in place. And through that, we'll continue to elevate the impact of the sector by using the data that's in our report, but continuing to articulate all the other data points we have for the economic impact of the arts and the outdoor sector. And it's important to note, if you didn't catch it on the last slide, that some of these funding mechanisms are very significant. So this is not Kelly and I saying, you know what, we should have one tiny little slither and that's what should go to arts and culture. We're saying that, you know, as an economic sector and as part of our economic strategy, we need to be looking at multi-million-dollar solutions to this issue and approach them jointly. So we're very excited about this because we feel like it gives us an ambitious approach to funding arts and culture and doing it in part from an economic perspective. And just to hammer home the point that Kelly made earlier, in the CARES Act and rescue plan funding that was provided in York County, we were fortunate in the CARES Act and ARPA being enacted while we were developing the economic action plan and then putting it forward. But Kelly and I also participated in a recovery task force that our county commissioners created. And within that recovery task force, they said, you know, based on data from the economic action plan, we should be investing in our arts and culture organizations and sites, even as we're, you know, emerging from the pandemic. And as a result, we're able to allocate just under $1 million in CARES Act funding to organizations, both large and small, including organizations that assist with, you know, the kinds of things that we've been talking about, like our Main Street organizations, our National Heritage Area. And when the rescue plan was passed, we're able to allocate another $1.8 million to those similar organizations, including some significant capital expenditures for our York County History Center, our performing arts theaters, and others. So the message really is that although we're embarking on this really what we hope is strategic plan and putting it in the framework of a county economic development strategy, there are also these opportunities like the CARES Act and like ARPA, where if there's will within your community and you can make the case, there are very opportunistic ways to insert support for these kinds of organizations into other opportunities. So that's just sort of a closing message to say, don't wait. You don't have to do a big study like this. You don't have to do an ambitious plan, but you can be an advocate for funding arts and culture as an economic sector within all these other opportunities that exist. And I think with that, we're going to stop sharing our screen and have a facilitated conversation.
Thank you both so much. That was really great to see the presentation and just listen to you both talk a little bit more in depth. Silas, I loved at the very beginning of the presentation that you made a point that arts leaders shouldn't count out their local economic development organization and our chamber based on the core functions that you all do. So this question is for you both, but I'm wondering if you can talk about how over the years, you've both navigated some of the perceived disconnects between the two sectors in your two organizations to, quote, move as equals, as we've called this session.
Yeah, you know, Kelly probably has more of a historic perspective on this, but you know, our current leadership at the Economic Alliance dates back about 6 years, and obviously our economic action plan is more recent than that. But I do think part of it is having the right people in the right place. But that doesn't mean that just because you're a chamber executive or your economic development corporation executive is not a personal believer in arts and culture that you can't, you know, start that conversation. For us, I think it really came down to making the connection between the goals that we have as an economic development organization and the benefits that arts and culture can can provide to meeting those goals. So it's not about sort of what's the right thing to do, although it is the right thing. It's also about achieving the goals that we have, and major goals that we have are attracting businesses and people and retaining businesses and people in York County. And increasingly that conversation nationally is about quality of life. It's still true that a lot of people are looking for, a favorable tax structure and transportation networks and low energy costs and low wages when they're deciding, where they're going to build a business. But right alongside with that is, what is the quality of life I can offer to my workforce and my executives? Because businesses have to attract and retain talent just like regions do. And so the regions that have high quality arts and cultural amenities, and I would throw in outdoor amenities, are those that can, when a business is looking to locate, say, here's what we have to offer to the people that are going to work there. And when young people are graduating from college, here's all the amenities that you're going to have if you choose to stay here or want to locate here. So for us, it's not a feel-good thing. It is, how can you be economically competitive in the 21st century? And all the investment that Kelly makes and all the advocacy work that Kelly does helps build our case to be able to do that even better.
Yeah, I 100% agree, Silas. And also, I like to say I'm in the arts in spaces that normally the arts don't go. So I'm going to economics club breakfasts and Rotaries, and really kind of making sure that we're talking about arts and culture in the framework of economic development and redevelopment of our community, healthcare, all of the things that we know that it's a connector for. So I also think that it's a long game. You want to make sure that you're having those conversations with those folks who are in your economic spaces, including your chambers and redevelopment corporations. That, like a good example is our historic downtown hotel, the Yorktown. Early on in the project, when it was being redeveloped, and this was really early on, our conversation with the folks that were working on that project were, don't wait until it's done to have art on the walls. Let's talk about ways creatives can be helpful to you in site-specific installations, and ways that we can have, local artists and craftspeople work on the hotel and maybe even save money. Like, let's think about ways locally we can employ people who live here. But that's a conversation that's, you have to really just actively engage and have. And, we have great partners in the York County Economic Alliance, and it just takes that time and that work to put in. And they're also very supportive of the work of our cultural groups, because Silas is right. They know that people are looking for those amenities when they're moving somewhere. And we have a lot of overlap on the folks who want the outdoor amenities and the cultural amenities. So they really do go hand in hand.
I think there's also sort of an understated overlap in who are the supporters of economic development and who are supporters of arts and culture. And although some of those people might serve on boards of both organizations, they, I think in their own mind, sometimes bifurcate the two and think, well, that's what I do when I care about arts and culture. Here's what I do when I care about business and the bottom line. Kelly and I shared a board chair for a period of time, and he is the head of HR from one of our largest companies, and it's a construction and development company. But it just is a testament to the fact that, on one hand, our board chair at the Economic Alliance can see the value of partnering with the Cultural Alliance because it helps economic development, but could also, be working with Kelly on raising funds from the very people who are owning and leading the businesses that are members of our organization. So I think sometimes just about encouraging people on your boards to see, that their different interests actually overlap in some ways that reinforce one another.
Right. And if I could institute that we share a board chair every year, I would, but no one would take that deal.
No.
But it was wonderful while it lasted. We really saw that the connection made in this one person over different projects. And it's, it seemed like a crazy idea at the time, but it worked so well because there were more synergies than I think that you realize unless you're serving a leadership role in both.
Yeah.
It's such a great point. And one thing that I've been trying to navigate and focus as well is to understand where those disconnects are in the field at large, and the kind of the distance or the chasm between economic development, chambers of commerce, and local arts agencies. And so I'm wondering if we can run with that a little bit and talk a little bit about how either you use the idea of quality of place? Or what are some of the other entry points that you both created to kind of change hearts and minds and move towards that people-focused, place-focused strategy that you both are talking about?
You want me to take this one, Paul?
Yeah, I can take a stab at it, and it'll probably sound a little repetitive, but because quality of life is just a term that we use to cover a lot of different things, anything from arts and culture to outdoor amenity access to historic preservation to walkable downtowns, but they all sort of lead back to the idea that there are these elements of a community that don't necessarily relate directly to the metrics that used to guide, I think, economic development, but really should be metrics that are inserted into economic development strategies. And sometimes when I'm talking about this with economic developers, I sort of list on one hand, here's all the older metrics that are still relevant, but you just know they don't go deep enough. And those are things like, how many square feet of development did you achieve? How many jobs did you create? On the other hand, are all the metrics that sort of allow you to go a little bit further. How many jobs did you create that were living wage jobs? How many feet of development did you do that was redevelopment in existing growth areas instead of sort of sprawling out into the countryside? So it's sort of just encouraging economic development organizations to think one step further than probably what their mandate used to be or what they perceive that mandate to be. And I know that sounds really easy when you have like a board and executives that are behind it, but in reality, I think when you start looking at the national dialogue around what is economic competitiveness, if you are ignoring these kinds of quality of life metrics and approaches, you really are you're going to be left behind. And so York County, we make the case that by focusing on it, we are actually trying to lead in some ways. And we're just a county of 450,000 people in South Central Pennsylvania. There's nothing inherently that special about us, except that we're trying to embrace some of these approaches that allow us to maybe take a couple steps ahead from other counties that aren't doing it.
And on the flip side, I think some of the disconnect in our arts and culture communities back into your chambers and economic development partners is, the arts with a capital A, really, your symphonies and ballets and your, as we used to say, the old arts with a capital A, everybody's in tuxedos and it's only for, certain people. It's really talking more about using the same shared language. We are the quality of place amenities. When you have someone coming into town considering a move of a family, they want to know where kids are going to take dance lessons, and they want to know where live music is happening and what other different things they have to do. So it's also on us, the arts and culture partners, to really pick up that mantle and talk about, Silas knows this. I love my stats. I can rattle off any kind of statistic on economic impact, health metrics, education metrics you want for arts and culture, but also people just want to have those shared moments. And the other thing that's really important, and I think we don't always give justice to, is that we are jobs that cannot be outsourced, right? So when you build a very welcoming place for artists and creative entrepreneurs to set up shop, one, they grow pretty quickly, and two, they invest locally, and three, they're the ones who are going to make what they're going to make, and they can make it anywhere in the world. And if you make it a good place for them to do that, their work doesn't necessarily have to be here for visitors. It can go all over the world, but their money comes back here. So again, it's just thinking again, like in a chamber, thinking again, like an economic partner, what's the power of our sector and how do we best harness it and grow it?
And just to build off of that, a lot of time, data doesn't tell you everything, and obviously numbers only go so far. But when you look at the numbers from our report that capture how many people are working in the creative sector and add in then, even if you don't add in the outdoor sector, but combined between the two, it is many times over the number of realtors that we have in York County, the number of financial professionals, the number of bankers. And yet each one of those groups, if you put them in front of, an economic alliance or a chamber, they're going to say, oh yeah, that's our bailiwick. That's the people that that's economic development. And yet we're sitting on top of a sector that's much more robust, much more resilient because it can't be outsourced. It's not downsized, and contributes to quality of life. So part of it is just like proudly saying we are an economic sector and then having the numbers to back it up, because in wages alone, the creative sector in York County is much larger than some that we would say are major economic drivers.
Very inspiring. Just going back to the economic action plan, which I know we've talked about is an outcome of a strategy that's built on shared values. I was hoping we could talk a little bit more about the relationship that you both have built over a long time, so that when the American Rescue Plan funds came down, you all worked together to distribute them very quickly. These kinds of things don't just happen, but they take that kind of trust and shared vision. And so hoping we could just talk a little bit more about that, and if you have some more reflections on what made that all possible.
Sure. I think, it was unusual when I talk to other organizations like ours across the country, and even here in PA, the fact that our sector, as well as the other quality of life groups, receive direct CARES and ARPA funds from our county government was unique and special. And that took time, right? I think Silas is absolutely correct. We have been building a strong relationship with Silas and the YCEA team for a long time, years and years. But it also is, the work of the Economic Action Plan. But if you step back a little bit before that and talk about, ways we had partnered together on attending their meetings and talking about the economic impact of the cultural sector, right? Just doing presentations to business leaders to talk about the economic powers. All of those are breadcrumbs we put down that got us to the point. So it is a long game, but that, I think Silas is absolutely correct. You don't have to wait to do a big study. All those little things you can do that are things that may seem like they're a small leap actually add up, so that you get that trust built in. And so, really having that and having, I'll be honest, a United Arts Fund in the community is really helpful. Most of South Central PA does not have another one. So the advocacy work is not really done the same way. So to my United Arts peeps, like we have a really critical role in making sure that these conversations are being had. And we're looked to be that expert in the room to help with these kind of decisions, because that's what we do. We invest in arts and culture, and we know our community. So once you're that trusted partner, as we are, so the York County Economic Alliance doesn't have to know the landscape of what cultural businesses and groups are in the community. That's our role for them. We're their partner in that work. And so I think that really is the relationship you build over time. But it all set up to be that point where those dollars could be administered, and we could make the case why outdoor needed it because of being really overrun and overused, but also the cultural and tourism groups needed it because they had the opposite cratering effect. And both of those cases were important, and both of those mattered, and both of those were seen as valid.
Yeah, just to build off of Kelly's point about making it easy really for county government and for our organization to know how to allocate funds. When you're looking across a county that has, 10,000 private businesses and nonprofits, how do you decide who to allocate funding to? Knowing the organizations that Kelly's organization already vetted and had already been investing in is just such a great starting point. And yes, we sort of branched out from there, but knowing there is this sort of core creative sector that Kelly had been, stewarding for, and the Alliance had been stewarding for decades, just gave us such a great starting point, in a similar way that the United Way of our county is sort of doing that for nonprofit social service organizations. It's sort of like a seal of approval, I guess, that helps really elevate organizations. But I just want to go back to what Kelly said earlier about showing up and being part of things. That's all credit due to Kelly for stepping up and being willing to be part of these conversations, serving on our recovery task force, which at face value probably doesn't seem like it's directly related to her day-to-day work, and yet had this pretty significant outcome, agreeing to co-chair our working group on quality of place when, as part of that, there's all sorts of conversations around broadband and municipal relationships and urban revitalization, but making sure that the voice of arts and culture was built into that as well. And then going to the stuff that I don't even like to go to, like our economics club breakfast, and you hear a bit different topic every month, and sometimes it's really boring and sometimes really interesting. But honestly, all that adds up to just, it feels natural. It's like culture change. It now feels natural that the Cultural Alliance has a seat at the table and an important voice in all these conversations, to the point where it would feel weird to move forward without Kelly and the organization being a part of it.
Great.
I do like, on the record, I do like the economics club breakfast. And I love hearing about the broadband plans.
Good.
That's
And don't tell our events team I said I don't like it.
I love.
This is only available on some parts of the internet.
Okay, good.
Just going back to the asset map, which is incredible, and I want to congratulate you both and your teams on that asset map, because it's amazing. In bringing together the outdoor and the cultural sectors, were there some unintended impacts or surprises? And I'm curious of what you hope to see coming from that learning or those surprises going forward.
So just one quick one, Kelly, and I know you probably, I think one of the interesting outcomes was seeing that the cultural sector is much more well established than the outdoor sector, and in particular for me, looking at the map where you could sort of turn on and off different segments of the map and seeing like, okay, well, the Cultural Alliance is this hub, and look at all these relationships that the Cultural Alliance is sort of pulling together. And then as a result, you're seeing all these relationships between the partner organizations and other organizations. But then when you sort of turn that off and you're looking at the outdoor sector, because there's no equivalent to the Cultural Alliance, you sort of have these great assets, but they're just sort of out there in isolation. And you might see one relationship here and not another there. So just for me, it hammered home the point that there is true value in having organizations that sort of serve as the hub to pull those together, those relationships together. And it doesn't mean that the Cultural Alliance, has a relationship with every single entity in the county, but you can just see the value of having that center of gravity that at least inspires those connections to happen.
Yeah, I didn't realize that ecosystem map would show the relationship so well, and kind of where, really kind of surprising where sort of they stopped and where people were not connecting. And so it was great, because now we kind of have a way to show where we do want people to connect together. But yeah, I also and I knew this was probably going to happen, but it still was great to see, learned about places I didn't know were, different arts groups that were out there I didn't know about. One that kind of ticks both boxes that we've talked about is there's like this Steamorama, big like event space. It's historic steam engines, but it also has our largest, indigenous powwow on it each year in Windsor, Pennsylvania. I had no idea it was there. So that's one of those both outdoor and cultural groups that is probably very important to its community in Windsor and brings lots of economic impact that we just didn't, quote unquote, have on the map. So it's one of those where we're learning about the depth of our cultural groups. And also, I think when you have a map like this, and again, this is more for my arts and culture folks out there, not everybody understands their value as a cultural, as someone who pulls people to them. Artist studios need to be on there. It's really discussing, again, that definition of what is a cultural asset, what is a quality of place of life asset. Sometimes it's just validating to see you're on a map. And really getting that coaching and getting those folks to fill out those surveys to learn about where they are and that they are valid and they are an attraction and we want them on the map.
And just one more observation, I think it's really nice to have the nonprofit, the public, and the private assets all on the same map, so that we don't feel like there's this weird, silos of like, well, you're a for-profit artist, or, your people pay to go to your site and you're revenue driven, or, oh, you're just the county's, arts and culture series, so you don't belong on there. And, it just shows the actual sector, regardless of if it's for-profit or public or private.
Great. We need everybody all in the same place. So one of the things that we want to talk about in this series the long-term sustainability of these relationships. And one thing we talked about in the first session was in that sustainability, making sure that relationships endure when people come and go, and inevitably people will stay and leave and shift in their positions. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about not just the practice in your institutions of relationship, but if there's any policy implications. And that could be policy in terms of codifying that practice in the institutions themselves, or even if you're seeing policy change in a legislative sense at the local, county, regional government level.
So I still want to codify that our board chair has to be chair of both organizations. But again, I'm probably not going to get that to go through. We can talk to them about that. I think it is a key that it can't just be who you know in those organizations. And I'm sure that happens. But I think because this has been built over time, and again, it really is so important that you're using your county's, compass, right? We're not making our own siloed plans for the future. Our plan dovetails into the county economic action plan, as it should. And that's also my own organization's, moving forward. What we're going to focus our attention on and efforts on is going to completely dovetail and integrate with what the YCEA is working on and focused on, which will also be what the County of York is working on and focusing on. I think once you have yourself tied to those outcomes, once you are pointing all to the same star, then you know that what you're doing is a longevity piece that's not a cult of personality.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the framework for the economic action plan really helps with that. It's part of our comprehensive plan for the county, and our commissioners, unanimously had to approve it. Our planning commission had to unanimously approve it. We had, thousands of people weigh in on it, and it's our marching orders for 10 years. So even if, a new CEO and leadership team comes to the Economic Alliance, they're picking up that plan and they're tasked with moving it forward. And it doesn't mean somebody couldn't, jettison it in some ways, but it really is how we'll track progress for the next decade in York County. And if those goals aren't achieved, then we've sort of failed. And I think the next iteration of that would really be around the funding. And, going back to our plan that says, here's all these mechanisms, that's where, policy change, yes, but even more importantly, county ordinances, legislation, really trying to create a structure that just lives on and puts real funding behind the kinds of principles that are in the plan is something that would outlive, Kelly and myself in our roles, because it's just going to be this thing that gives back over decades, ideally. So I think we'll really know if we've been successful if we can get some traction on one of those mechanisms that just becomes part of how we fund arts and culture in the outdoors. Forever is a long term, but decades.
Yep.
So just to close out, what would you both offer to folks that, one, they should avoid in building these relationships, and what are you excited about in working together for the future?
I will go first. What to avoid, I think, is I think people are people. Get out there, and I think Silas has said this a few times, and I'll say it as well. Do small things and then plan big things. And really just get folks on board with you. People are people, really just have those conversations and those relationships. They take time to build. That's okay, start now. It's never too late to really start to form those relationships. And if you're waiting, I love Andrew Simonette, who is with Artist Hue based out of Philadelphia, who does a lot of work in helping artists build sustainable practices. His phrase is, no one is coming. If you keep waiting for that person to show up, who's going to help you do the things you want to do, that person is you. So really getting out there and just, meeting the people in your chambers and economic development groups who are doing the work, asking good questions and start that participation off, I think is really, I would say, that is the best advice I think I can give. What was the other question?
What are you excited about?
Oh, I'm excited about so many things. We have so many redevelopment projects coming online in York, in our community, that are creatively based, right? So, you know, we have an art school expansion coming into York, hopefully. We have a big co-working creative space that's redeveloping a building that has been vacant and is going to provide around 20,000 square foot of space for creatives and thinkers and entrepreneurs. There's just so many great, our big, you know, York History Center, big campus history interactive museum is going to be coming online. So it's really just this, again, we're doing the small things and planning the big things. And when those big things happen, it seems like, wow, where did that come from? That came from 15 years of small things. So it's just a really exciting, energizing time to be in York.
And I don't think I could say it any better than Kelly just said, except to add that, you know, all the things that Kelly's excited about, we're excited about too, you know, in some ways for the same reasons, in some ways for totally other reasons. You know, the art school that we're hoping will come to York is going to be in a white elephant real estate property that was acquired by a redevelopment authority because it's a redevelopment project and we want to, you know, avoid blight in our city, but has all these other great benefits as well. So there's so many reasons to be excited about these projects and the overlap that it has between the kinds of things we're interested in, the kinds of things Kelly's interested in. And I think that goes to what to avoid as well, which is it would be very easy for an arts organization, an economic development organization to focus on all the ways that we don't sync up. So focus on the ways that you do. And we found some really meaningful, tangible ways that make sense, that aren't artificial, and they're not forced. They make a whole lot of sense from both of our perspectives. And instead of focusing on, you know, supporting everything that both organizations do, it's really about how can we work together on stuff that, you know, makes a tangible impact and meets both of our strategic plans.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much for your presentation and for this conversation and insight. This has been wonderful. I'm inspired. I wish we could spend more time chatting together, but we'll close out the session for today. As a reminder, this is the third session of How to Partner with Your Chamber of Commerce, Part 3. As part of this package, there are 2 additional pre-recorded sessions and a digital toolkit to accompany this content. Kelly and Silas's work is also featured as an interview and case study in the digital toolkit, so don't miss reading more about their work through there. Parts 1 and 2 are available on ArtsU, and each includes on-demand sessions and a toolkit. You can also find the toolkits on the Partnership Movement at partnershipmovement.org. Many thanks again to you, Kelly and Silas, and thank you to our community for listening to this series. Have a good day.